Thank you. Good afternoon. It's everyone's favorite panel, the 3:30 on day 2. Thank you for being here. I'm the founder and CEO of Tremendous, digital payments provider that partners with legal administrators to facilitate settlement disbursements. And I am joined today by 2 experts who administer cases on opposite sides of the pond. I'm joined by Eric Miller, VP of Case Management at AB Data, a leading claims administrator in North America with experience in Europe and other geographies too. And Eric, you've been there just for 13 years, right?
I've been with AB Data for 13 years, but I've been in the industry for 25 years now.
And I'm also joined by Niamh Tattersall, who is the Director of EMEA Operations at Verita Global, a global claims administrator spanning across North America and Europe. And we are going to discuss case management with an emphasis on fraud prevention, AI, and the differences and similarities between jurisdictions, specifically the US and Europe. But before we dive in, I want us to clarify what case management is, because to attorneys, that might mean something different than on the administration side. And Eric, with your greater than 20 years of experience, you might know a thing or two, so perhaps you could enlighten us.
Very true. Okay, so as an administrator, the way we look at case management really is from the start of a case where we're launching the case, setting up websites, getting telephone lines set up, developing notice plans, disseminating notice, corresponding with class members throughout the administration, intaking claims, processing claims, calculating damages, and distributing funds to class members.
Perfect. Niamh, anything to add?
No, I think that was a perfect summary.
Thank you. That'll be my one good one today.
Great. Well, I would love to dive a little bit deeper into the claims sign-up process. And so specifically, maybe we could jump in a little bit deeper there. And Niamh, if you wouldn't mind sharing the process the claimants go through in order to sign up.
Absolutely. So looking at the UK, it really depends on the type of matter, right? Is it opt-in or is it opt-out? Opt-in, you traditionally have the claim sign-ups before you've even issued the claim with the court. So, right, that could be an omnibus claim form. GLO is a little bit different. Whereas when you look at an opt-out situation, so in the Competition Appeal Tribunal, you can issue the claim and you can accept registrant information, right? So first name, surname, email. But the actual claim enrollment process doesn't start until you've got either that approved settlement or you've got that judgment, so an award of damages.
Great. Eric, same in the US? Any differences?
No, it's primarily the same. Typically, it's more of the opt-out process versus an opt-in process.
All right, great. Well, on the UK side and the European side, there is a lot that is new. And Niamh,
certainly newer.
Yeah, newer. And so I'm sure there must be some educational challenges with consumers. Would love to hear how that impacts the claim sign-up process and how you go about perhaps notifying consumers.
Yeah, so knowledge is power, right? So when you have a new sort of topic that you're introducing to an entire society, that's going to come with some hurdles. And the way we really overcome that in terms of our noticing and our communications with the class members, and that doesn't matter if it's an opt-in matter or an opt-out, is really having that strong call to action, right? So what's the claim about? What does this mean for you? What do you need to do? And being consistent in the messaging to make sure that what is being said about any particular matter or about collective actions in general in the public sector is so important to maintain that consistency. So that is something that we are seeing, particularly with some of these recent matters that have either got a settlement approved, they're looking at distributions. It's, okay, how do we get those sign-ups? How do we increase the take-up rate? I mean, I think the take-up rate is like the dirty word in the UK at the moment in terms of how do we navigate it, how do we overcome it. So having that strong sort of call to action, having that consistency, and then knowing your class, right? So at the core, I always think a claims administrator is a data management company, so we have to be data-driven. And that means you need to know who the class members are. You need to tailor the notice and communications and the sign-up process to the class to maximize those sign-ups as much as possible.
Great. And there are, of course, some signups that aren't favorable. Fraud
Yeah.
has certainly evolved over the past several years. Fraud has been around for a while, but we've definitely seen an evolution of it. And Eric, I would love to hear your perspective on fraud and how it's evolved. But maybe to kick things off, are there any numbers or figures that you can share that kind of give a feel for the scale that you're dealing with?
Ooh, that's going to be scary for people. So when I started back in the day, you might see 5, 10, 20 claims come in for fraud. I'm talking like early 2000s. With online filing and all that, now it's a massive increase that's being dealt with in the United States right now. You can see upwards of 80, 90% of your claims come in that are fraudulent, whether they're done by programmers with bots, like pumping them into your online filing system. There's what they call like claim farm type things, where it's a room full of people entering claims. So it's certainly changed, and it's something that we're all fighting against right now. If you even look at the fraud filings from, say, 5 to 10 years ago, you could find some very simple things like duplicative IP addresses, addresses that don't exist, just random things that were very clear. I mean, I had a case where 100,000 claims came in. Whoever programmed it put 2 spaces between the first and last name. So it was simple to find them. But they've gotten very good at it. Again, rotating IP addresses, things like that. So it's been a battle for sure.
Mm-hmm. Are there any new heuristics? You gave an example of 2 spaces between names. That's an odd one. But over the past year with these bots, have you noticed anything new that indicates fraud that maybe in the past wasn't relevant?
Not to give everything away, but
never know
there's
who's in the room.
definitely things that you can look at, like the timing of the claims being entered. It can be every 10 seconds you see a claim pop through. Again, they do reuse IP addresses oftentimes. It's not constant, but you can also look up certain IP addresses. You can find there's a lot of information that's captured online through the cookies, et cetera, when they're filing claims that you can look at, and you look for patterns primarily. Again, email addresses that are in the claims that are relatively new, things like that.
Yeah. Niamh, what has your experience been?
Again, going back to the data, we sort of analyze it and we'll see the trends. So if there's a mismatch in the data, so if I've got my first name, surname in a claim form, but then my email is a random, combination of letters and numbers that have nothing to really do with me, or a different name entirely, that sort of shoots up that warning flag as, okay, what's going on here? And then, of course, if that's repeated, right? So if you have same name, but 100 different email addresses, or vice versa. So looking at the data and really analyzing, okay, what's the story that's being told here, and then managing that appropriately. Because we always say there's a difference between a fraudulent claim and a deficient claim, right? So if me being tired at midnight trying to submit a claim form and I'm putting my postcode wrong, that's different than some bad actor who's, in their rooms working with the technology to submit thousands of fraudulent claims. So our job and our expertise is being able to distinguish between the two and manage those appropriately.
Yeah. And to dive in a little bit deeper there, what has the impact been to these legitimate signups that maybe something looks a little bit off? Has it been harder for legitimate consumers to register for cases? Obviously, you're walking a tight line between trying to keep the bad guys out and keep all the good consumers in. Have the challenges increased with getting the good consumers in?
So I don't think it's increased for getting the good consumers in. Like we haven't changed a lot as far as allowing the claims. We haven't clamped down. You can clamp down a website really tight. So, we do capture, we do those things, but you can make it even more difficult. So you don't really want to do that and, lower your eligible claims coming in. I kind of got lost in my thought there for a second.
Well, I can sort of jump on. So we always say it's striking that nice balance, right? So it's creating a process where fraud mechanisms and protections are in place so that you're removing sort of the bad actors as much as possible, while creating a smooth, streamlined, user-friendly process for class members to submit claims. Now, obviously, that's working in a really tight sweet spot. But from our perspective, when we're thinking about, designing these claim forms and the portals, we're looking at it from a user experience. And if I'm a legitimate individual or business owner coming in and submitting a claim, I shouldn't even really be identifying what the fraud mechanisms are because I'm legit. And what I mean by that is if I am going through a claim form and I need to prove my identity, that's very straightforward, right? I pull out whatever mechanism that the claim form requires for me to prove my identity, and I move right on to the next stage of the claim form. But if you're a bad actor or a bot filer, you're going to hit a wall. So you're going to run into that fraud protection measure, and you're going to see that mechanism, and then you're going to say, okay, now what? Mm-hmm. So from our perspective, it's creating that balance, and that's why it's so important to have the experienced claims administrators to support you through building that claim form, because those fraud protection measures are so important.
Right. And this is certainly a problem that AI is very relevant to solve, right? You're dealing with scale, you're dealing with patterns that need to be detected. How have you integrated AI into your fraud prevention processes?
There's a lot of stuff with the AI. I mean, again, I mentioned 80, 90%. You can come in and have a case where you have 20 million claims filed. It might be something easy like, let's say, a case on chicken, right? Like everyone buys chicken, so it's everyone's a class member. So you can use AI and other, programmatic ways to identify these frauds, whether it's, as Niamh mentioned, like the name doesn't go with the address. Again, I mentioned that hopefully there's no fraud filers in here because this is a good one. The new email addresses, that's a good one. There's also outside vendors that work with this that are very good at finding patterns, and they can analyze the data with you to identify any of the fraud. But it's very time consuming, it's costly, it affects other eligible class members because somebody's got to pay for this work to be done. Again, it lengthens the time of an administration, which over 25 years, the whole goal has been to get it done faster. And instead, this is causing it to take longer, which is awful.
Right.
Well, and I think, our starting point with AI is whatever the client's comfort level is, right? Every different client or parties to a collective action have different comfort levels in terms of to the extent that we can utilize AI when it's brought into the process. So once we sort of have those parameters set, where AI can be an asset in sort of combating fraud, so to speak, is really once those claims have come in. So a claim's been submitted, and we're going through the claim review process. So AI is great at organizing various data points and documents into certain categories. They can pull out certain aspects of the data from claims and notify patterns. And patterns, again, going back to being data-driven and telling that story, when things don't add up, that's going to raise a warning flag. And that's going to be something that will require further insight and further investigation. So I think from that perspective, AI can be a really good tool if it's utilized properly in a cost-effective manner, of course. So that's just a few of the ways that we're exploring the use of AI to sort of combat these fraudulent claims.
Yeah, sounds much more cost-effective than having interns go through 20 million claims. That's
Very
great.
correct.
Or worse, your associates, because remember, we used to be at a time where law firms thought that they could do all this on their own, and that's why we kind of got invented in the first place as a business.
Right. How
It's
did
to
those
support.
conversations? Well, I'm curious to dig in now. How did those conversations go? At what point did they relent?
Oh, it's not even a relent. They were like, "This is really expensive. Please help us. Can you do it in a more cost-effective manner? And it's like, well, yes, absolutely.
Great. Last question related to case signups, and then we're going to move into disbursements. Niamh, this question for you, because this is on the data privacy side, and would love to know how your considerations for data privacy are affecting your operations.
Everything, I think, is the blank answer. So data privacy and GDPR measures in Europe. So now I'm combining, mainland Europe as well as the UK are paramount. That really drives all of our work on a matter, I think probably tied to or secondary to the actual budget that we have to work within. And the reason why is because obviously in Europe, the data privacy considerations are a lot more stringent than other jurisdictions. So we have to consider in every single matter, what data are we collecting? Where is it being stored? Who can access it? At what point can they access it? Who can it be shared with? As well as other considerations, so, deletion requests. All of that really sort of drives the claim process. It drives our internal processes. And it also drives communications with the class, right? So when you have this new regime or newer regime across Europe, and they don't have the familiarity of these types of matters, data privacy concerns are at the forefront of their minds. Mm-hmm. So from an operations perspective, it also loops back into our communications with the class. How are we phrasing that call to action in a way that increases trust and doesn't lend to suspicion of scams and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Great. Eric, anything to add on the U.S. side?
Of course, data privacy is huge. I personally work on a lot of cases that involve purchases of pharmaceutical drugs, for example. Mm-hmm. So everything is extremely strict. You can't have I've heard a story about somebody sending something out with the drug name showed through the window in the envelope and got sued for millions. So you just have to be very careful about what you put out there. I'm very aware of, in those cases in particular, but in general, protecting everyone's data. It could be banking information. There's so much data we have. The security is unbelievable. Certain people can get into the databases, things like that.
Right. Moving on to disbursements, Eric, back to you. What payment options have the highest uptake rate in the U.S.?
At this point, is probably with everything. Most things are shifting to digital. It's been that way for quite a while. Fortunately, the class members are getting more comfortable with it. The earlier years, it was a little bit tougher because everyone knew who had to open up an envelope and cash a check. Mm-hmm. Now it's getting an email with a code or things like that. And, different demographics are more comfortable than others. So it's definitely shifting towards the digital side. Of course, as you know, being in your industry, you have so many options that you can do. It's not like a cut and dry. You have one option. Gift cards, digital credit card, you name it.
Right. And Niamh, you had mentioned that consumers in the UK want bank transfers, but are reticent to give out their information. Right? Yeah. There is a culture here of privacy and protecting your data. How are you dealing with that tension?
Yeah, and it's a challenge, right? But it's a reality. And people don't think there's a lot of psychology that goes into the work that we do, but when you're dealing with people, it's inevitable. There's a lot of psychology. So, and what I mean by that is, it's very natural for somebody to want something very quick, i.e. money, at the lowest risk impact to them, right? So they don't want to provide their sensitive data over, but they're happy to take the money and run with it, so to speak. So how do we manage that? I think first and foremost in the European market and honing in on the UK, we have to go back to how are we educating the class about it? How are we discussing the use of data? How forthright are we being with what will be required down the line in terms of fulfilling the claim? Mm-hmm. And then I think the other side to that sort of two-prong approach would be looking at those alternative payment options. right? So if a bank transfer or a faster payment is not going to be, I guess, seen from the consumer's perspective to be an incentive to submit a claim, then you have to look at those alternative options within the budget, obviously.
Right.
Always comes back to the money.
Right, of course.
But I'm interested from your perspective, though. So when you look at various payment options, and particularly in the US, are you seeing any sort of trends at the moment in your line of work?
Sure. Well, I think the trend is that there is a wide set of preferences for consumers. There are consumers that are comfortable giving their bank account information. There are consumers that prefer PayPal. Only 57% of US adults have a PayPal account, though. So you cannot satisfy a very large class with just PayPal or one of these options where you only have to share your email address. You need to provide choice. Bank transfer, ACH, PayPal, Venmo, and gift cards, Visa prepaid cards. It's by giving that optionality that you're able to satisfy a very large number of people. So what we've seen is increased interest in expanding the optionality for recipients, because it is not the case in the US that there is just one predominant mode of payment to individuals.
Okay, interesting.
As nice as that would be.
Yeah, right.
And I think you certainly want to offer those options. I've had somebody that we didn't have PayPal, but probably 8 other options right to the court because we did not have PayPal.
Right, right. Those are the fun ones to deal with, right?
Yes.
What role do attorneys have in helping develop the payout strategy in terms of defining options? Eric, what has your experience been?
I feel that everything we do is a collaboration. Like, you know, you're mentioning just the payment side. It's from the start, from the claim forms, the notices, the notice plans. Like, we collaborate throughout. Generally, counsel want to know some statistics, and they want to know what the options are, pros, cons,
The
et cetera.
cost.
I was just going to throw in cost. Cost is always in there. But that's generally how it works. It's a collaboration. The class counsel, I find these days, is very involved in most decision making.
Right. And what guidance do you typically give during that collaboration?
I lay it out. I lay out the options and I tell them the pros and cons. Like, if you do it this way, here's what's good and here's what could be bad. You know, you take checks, like as she mentioned, money. If you say
Right.
checks, I'm going to say costs more, takes a week to get in the mail. They want to reissue. It's going to take a few weeks to get that in the mail. Takes some time to cash them. You have to give a void date, et cetera. So you kind of have a long period of time. But again, pros and cons to everything.
Right, right. And even though things are still early in the settlement phases, but what has your experience been?
So we're always naturally driven by either a settlement agreement or a judgment. So obviously the legal representatives would have had a hand in negotiating the settlement agreement from that perspective. And so if it's written out in the agreement, okay, here's how we want payments to be distributed, this is the method, etc., then that's really sort of how we're driven. If it's not, then, you know, to Eric's point, exactly, it's a collaboration. So it's sort of laying out the options, laying out the costs, and I always go back to it because it's so important, is know your class, right? So be that data-driven in terms of what's the demographic, where are they geographically located, that's important, and any other factors that might impact distributions from that perspective. I think something that's, you know, really interesting as well is when the defendant gets involved. So do they have an account credit option? What does that look like? Is that something that's been agreed? Is that something that has to get renegotiated? You know, what data is available there? That's a really interesting topic that I do believe we're going to see a lot more of, particularly with some of these larger companies where the data's a lot fresher. Right, so they should be able to have that information. They've got the customer information, and if someone elects, okay, great, I'll take an account credit to my X account, you know, whatever that account is, and get paid that way, because from their perspective, again, for the defendants in the room, that's a little bit of a reputational sort of consumer retainment measure that I think is an interesting angle. My understanding is we see it in other jurisdictions. I do think we're going to start seeing it more so in Europe, when we actually get more settlements or award of damages down the line.
Yeah, great. Last question on disbursements. In the past maybe 5 years, there's been a very large shift from checks to digital options. I'm curious what your perspectives are on any new changes that we might see in the next 3 to 5 years on the payment side.
I think you'll continue to see checks drop, and then the other part is I think there'll be more acceptance of the digital methods. Even for myself, like it took me forever to do Venmo and all that stuff. People would be like, Venmo me the money. I was like, I don't want to sign up for anything. But at this point, I have Zelle, I have Venmo, I have PayPal. So I think that's what you're going to see is just more comfort level with that.
Right. And Niamh?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think particularly when we look at the European market, that's going to be so instrumental, is having that normalization of the process, the regime in general, but the various payment options, what distribution look like, what's required of a class member in order to actually get their compensation. Unfortunately, that comes with time, and there's a lot we have to do before we get there, and we're prepared to do that. But I think that'll be a really interesting trend to see. And then, like I said before, sort of utilizing the defendant's data, or at least parties in the courts relying more so on what data may be made available by the defendant. I definitely see that as what's coming up. And then who knows, maybe someone will invent a really interesting sort of new payment option that we haven't seen yet. That's always fun to explore. But I'm interested, what do you anticipate coming up in the next few years from that perspective?
Well, I think I would agree that there is going to be increased comfort with digital options, and I think choice is going to remain key. I do not think that we're going to see a convergence of consumers redeeming just one option. I don't think stable coins are going to be the consumer preference anytime soon. I think that's very fanciful. We just have not seen the consumer demand for any options that we aren't all familiar with. And it is very evenly split between different monetary options, ACH, PayPal, Venmo, and alternative options like gift cards and prepaid cards. So I think that's going to remain important. We work directly with companies, though, and I think what we will see on the corporate side is a move towards more seamless solutions that make it very easy to administrate these payouts. And there are a number of companies that have been doing very manual processes operating off of spreadsheets, and it is going to become much more seamless as businesses move to platforms that help disperse funds at scale. So I think that's one of the trends.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think something to add to that, I do foresee potentially more opportunities for specific jurisdictions to band together, so like banks, for example, and sort of create their own mechanisms potentially. So, in Canada, we've got Interact, we've got, in the Netherlands, they've got Ideal, and it's something where it's very familiar in the market. Everyone uses it every day. They know about, not every day, but they use it frequently enough that they're comfortable with it. And something like that, where you sort of centralize it per jurisdiction, would be interesting. Because if you look at Europe as a whole, they've got SEPA payments. So single euro payment account or something like that. That's what SEPA stands for. It's effectively a bank transfer, so like a faster payment. And that works across all of Europe, EU. But if you can narrow that down to a specific jurisdiction where they have their own mechanisms, I think that would be really interesting. Mm-hmm. And when we think about the various markets, particularly in Europe, and we think about the trust that is involved with this type of data, having that information or that sort of mechanism centralized through either, the banks, reputable, or various companies that offer those services, who knows whether that could sort of lend to more incentive for class members to sign up for claims.
Absolutely.
Time will tell.
And I think we've seen that to some extent on the U.S. side with Zelle. the consortium amongst banks. And if you look at Zelle's traction over time, it was minimal, but it has really taken off. But there is a very clear network effect amongst various payment options. There's Cash App, there's PayPal, there's Venmo, and people have their groups, certain demographics that are all on these specific networks, and it's very hard to pry them away from whatever their preferred network is because everyone they interact with and transact with is on that network. And it's geographic based, it is age based, and it is, once it is that tightly bound, it's very difficult to move folks. But I could certainly see in certain geographies that don't have kind of these native digital payments solutions like PayPal or Venmo, a consortium of banks and a tech layer on top of that could really take off.
Yeah.
All right, well, last topic for us, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into AI, and we talked about it in fraud prevention. How else are you using AI on your teams? Eric, can we start with you?
Of course. So how are we using AI on our teams? I'll tell you, the first thing I've noticed mostly is pretty much anything anybody in my project teams right now has been run through some sort of AI to clean up the language, which is great. It's the emails are, very well written and everything. Of course, a little bit
Fake.
Yes, yes. It kind of loses
Inhuman,
people's.
dare I say?
Yes, loses people's voices. So you certainly have that aspect. They're being used. AI is being used to write declaration language, call scripts, website text. So it's been all that type of textual stuff that you see going out. There's probably being some AI used on that. On the data side, you have the programmers. They're using it to write code. Simplify code, clean up code, things like that. On the claim side, again, you're using it to find patterns and things like that in the data. But that primarily be kind of where we're heavily using AI at this point, where we're kind of going into it in a slow but good way. So we're not just trying to all right, throw AI on that, throw it on that, throw it on that, because mistakes happen. The first time we used AI to develop a script, it's supposed to say corporation, it said county, right? So you got to be careful what you're doing. And like I mentioned with project managers doing emails, they throw in a thought, they copy paste it, they don't read what they just wrote. I get CC'd on and I read it and I'm like, you didn't read this.
Right.
It's not right. So you have to be very careful with it.
Right, and I think you had mentioned that you had tried AI for support at some point. Is that right?
Tried
AI for support for.
Oh, we were trying to work with that to try and do some at this point in time with emails. Again, I'm keep aging myself. When I started, people didn't send emails on cases. It was phone. Emails. People can be sitting anywhere, a bus stop. They can be sitting in here firing off emails. How's my claim? Is my claim right? You don't answer for 15 minutes. They send you another email. Then they write the court. I emailed them twice. They didn't email me back. So we tried to do something with that using AI, and it's not been easy. Hopefully, we're going to get there. That's the goal, because you can see tens of thousands of emails come in on a case.
Yep.
You may have those auto-generated responses, but does everyone read them? No. Kind of those catch-all responses, but getting it more, tailored to the questions and things like that. And there's a lot of work to put into it. It's not like you just say, all right, here's the AI on it, and it just works.
Right.
You got to develop it.
Right. So it sounds like there's an opportunity to massively improve the consumer support experience, but we're not quite there yet.
Correct.
Yeah. But you're experimenting, trying, and
Yes.
heading that direction.
Yes. Again, as I said, you can't just drop something like this out there and just say, if it fails, it fails. Because in our line, it has to work.
Right.
You have to have it right.
Right.
I could have an AI telling everybody that calls they're not a class member. That would not be a good thing.
Right. Niamh, how are you using AI on your team?
So from a purely internal perspective, we utilize the various Microsoft options, so Copilot, so summarizing emails, calendars, things like that, just to really help keep on top of your workload. I think that's an aspect of AI that I think a lot of industries and companies are using but isn't talked about as much as more of the generative side of it. But on that side, something you said really resonated with me is with the call scripts. So what we mean by call scripts is when you have a matter and you have communications where either class members are going to be ringing in either via IVR first, or they're going to speak to a live operator, or if they're going to be sending in the emails that Eric mentioned, we typically have the scripts that are approved by the parties. And that script is, here's how you start the call, here's some, responses, and then obviously we train our tech and our callers, the actual live operators, to sort of tailor the responses. But what was a really interesting exercise that we are also trying to implement is anticipating responses externally, internally, and utilizing AI. And what I mean by that, to be a little bit clearer, is we know that if you have a class, for example, that is made of consumers, that they're going to have questions likely about the matter, right? So we know that the claim website is the information hub, we have all the FAQs, and the call scripts, naturally mirror the FAQs. But we also know they're likely going to pull up Google and they're going to say, what is this? What is going on? And so, we've done exercises where we'll see what the responses are. If we come up with our own questions and we sort of look at that in AI, and then we tailor our call scripts, we tailor our responses to almost anticipate and get ahead of that. So, for example, if the AI is incorrect, to Eric's point, because it's not 100% foolproof yet, we get ahead of that in our responses and say, you may be under the impression of this, but it's really that. And that sort of mechanism of utilizing consumers' sort of mindset of where they're going to start, I think is a really interesting way to utilize AI. And it's a little bit of an indirect analysis, but I think that's really important because you have to take a step back and say, okay, what's the user experience? What are they seeing? And what are they looking things up? So by the time they get to you, you're already ahead of it, and that's really what our expertise is flexibility and anticipation of all these complex matters that come up.
Right. So it sounds like you're using AI in many ways. It's making you and your teams more productive. How does that influence how you're going to grow your teams and the hiring process?
Well, the good thing is a lot of the younger people that are out there looking for jobs, they're using it. My 14-year-old daughter uses it. So I think it's one of those things. I don't know who said it. I've heard the saying is your job won't be replaced by AI, but your job could be replaced by somebody who uses AI. I think that's a good saying there. Again, I find that most people, regardless, are very open to it. It simplifies your work. Like I've written things where I used to sit down and be like, I would have spent 2 hours on that. And instead I big long running sentence, generated my stuff, and then I just clean it up. So it saves so much time, or can save so much time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think from a sort of staffing perspective, you definitely look for talent that is open to using technology across the board, right? But I don't think you can get hired by a claims administration company if you're not at least proficient in some of the basics.
Like turning on a computer.
Yeah, that's important. Picking up a phone, things like that. But really looking at the skills and the comfort level and at least the interest, right? Because what we really need and we seek is those that are interested in AI, interested in learning about it, utilizing it in their day-to-day life, and integrating it into the processes and then becoming experts on it. So from a hiring perspective and a staffing perspective, it's important to have those team members that at least have the basic knowledge or are willing to learn. That openness is so big. It's a really big component, really, to all of AI, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you test specifically for abilities using AI tools in the hiring process in any way?
Not currently, no. I would be very interested to see if in the future if that's something that companies really push towards. But yeah, no, not that. Are you guys doing that? Or
No, we haven't. No.
Yeah. Are you guys doing that?
Probably.
They're like, listen, we know the idiots.
Yes.
For engineering, it is now allowed to use AI for some interviews, right? I don't think most interviews we're testing can you use AI, but if it is an expectation that someone will be using AI on the job, we are permissive of its use on some interviews.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think the way you put it is somebody that's open to technology that is going to eventually use it.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to find the benefits.
Right. Well, occasionally you come across an engineer that's not bullish on AI and it's not a fit, but yes. Great. Well, we have just under 4 minutes left. Would like to open things up for the audience if there are any questions.
When talking about fraudulent submissions for class membership, have you also dealt with fake documents being submitted to support those roles? And is that starting to touch the AI world as well?
I can speak to that. So fake documentation, again, going back, we've always dealt with fake documentation. Fortunately, it used to be really bad. People cut and paste things and glued them on and photocopied them, and they were pretty easy to find. They are now using things where they can generate PDF documentation and things like that. There are ways that you can identify that. Always perfectly, no, but you can always ask for more information. But there's data behind PDFs, there's metadata and things like that you can find patterns. So you can certainly find it. But as far as AI, we're not using it to find that right now. Right now, it's more of a manual process, but certainly it exists.
Well, I meant, do you find that the candidates are using AI to generate fraudulent documents?
Oh, I am sure they are. Yes.
Yeah, definitely without a doubt, I would say.
Great.
Yeah, they're great. Like, again, using the pharmaceutical example, we have people, they go out on Google Images and they grab photos of things, prescriptions, and try and send them in. And again, you wind up seeing the same image 4,000 times. Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions from our audience? Yes, please.
Hi, sorry, I know you touched on this earlier, but could you possibly walk through again how you're fielding out bots, AI, methods of trying to, submit fraudulent claims? I'm aware that bot farms are quite an issue that are on the rise, but I'm just curious as to what measures you have in place to screen them out, if you do.
Well, I think I touched on that a little bit. Again, you can't tighten the online forms down so much that nobody can file. That's a big deal. So you block what you can. You have the firewalls. You have all these different manners that your settings and things that you can do to block these things. Limiters, like, you can't fire off claims from the same place, like one after another. They're going to get through anyhow. And then you start, again, that's when it turns to looking for the patterns. There's outside vendors that assist with these types of things for digging into the data that's captured with these online filings to locate them. And then ultimately, can mistakes happen and we kick out an eligible claimant? Sure. But generally, you're going to notify them, give them an opportunity to respond. I just had a case where we, felt comfortable with what we identified as bot fraud or claim farm fraud or whatever you want to call it. And as a safety measure, we emailed deficiency notifications to all these people, thousands, tens of thousands. We got tens of thousands of responses with bad documentation. So it's a moving target. We're always working at it. Perfect world, someday we figure out a way to just stop it because it costs more and it's adding so much time to the process. And again, as administrators, no one has patience for us. So we just want to get the case done and payments out just as bad as anybody wants to get their payment.
Thank you.
I think,
Please.
Oh, sorry. The only thing I would add is, when we look at the fraud prevention measures, we sort of divide it into different phases, right? So before they even start filling out the information for a claim, so let's say it's an electronic claim, what are those firewall protections that you have in place? And then when you actually get into the claim itself, what's the design of the claim form and how is that preventing fraud? Does it require proof of identity? Does it require you to go through various checks? Is it a quick, here's my name, here's my email, submission and done, and then once the claim's submitted as the final phase, the review process, right? So utilizing the technology, the deficiency process is a big one, and then making sure that from end-to-end process, all of those measures are adaptable, flexible, and as stringent as possible.
Thank you for your question. And we've got some big flashing double
I know
zeros
the
here,
noughts are really putting me off.
which means we're at time. I want to thank my co-panelists,
Thank
Niamh
you.
Tattersall and Eric Miller,
And
Thank you.
Nick.
and thank our audience
Thanks,
too.
Nick.
Thanks for sticking with us in the afternoon.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think there's one more panel downstairs, right, coming up? Fantastic.